habitations of his throne. A fire goeth before him, and burneth up his enemies round about. His lightnings enlightened the world. The earth saw and trembled. The hills melted like wax at the presence of the Lord, at the presence of the Lord of the whole earth. The heavens declare his righteousness, and all the people see his glory. Confounded be all that serve graven images, that boast themselves of idols, worship him, all ye gods. Zion heard and was glad, and the daughters of Judah rejoiced because of thy judgments, O Lord. For thou, Lord, art high above all the earth. Thou art exalted far above all gods. Yea, that ye love the Lord, hate evil. He preserveth the souls of his saints. He delivereth them out of the hand of the wicked. Light is sown for the righteousness, and gladness is for the upright in heart. Rejoice in the Lord, ye righteous, and give thanks to the remembrance of his holiness.
May the Lord add a blessing to the reading, hearing, and doing of his word. In Jesus' mighty name, amen.
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 First, I want to say praise to the Most High God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and teach to everyone that's here in Jesus' holy name in this blessed Sabbath day. Glad to have everyone here that's in the flesh, and also those that might be joining online, Facebook Live or YouTube or wherever you might be. Glad to have you. Today's lesson is called Holy Things. It's called Holy Things. And what this lesson is about is it's about the little things that the Lord has had us doing. It's about the things that were in the temple, that were in the tabernacle. See, all of these things that the Lord has doing it's not just to keep us busy. It's not just to have us do something to occupy our time. These things actually mean something. And if we take the time to find out exactly what they mean, it just might save your life. It just might save your soul alive. And as we begin to read through the scriptures, a lot of times you stumble across these things, and the reading is a little bit mundane sometimes because it gets to talking about 5 cubits this, 6 cubits that, 10 cubits that, and so on and so on and so forth. And that can get a little bit mundane reading, and it's not exactly exciting as maybe the Lord sending the sword through someone's house and chopping off heads. So we tend to lose a little bit of the excitement when we're reading that. But it's not all about excitement all the time. Sometimes you need to get the meat of what the Lord has put in this book, because it just might, like I said, it just might save your soul alive. And like Brother Bowie always says, if the Lord didn't want you to know it, He wouldn't have put it in this book. So it's in here for a reason. And so today we're going to touch on some of those things, some of those holy things, and we're going to find out, hopefully, just how important some of those holy things are and what they should mean to us and what the lesson is that we should take from those things. So without me flapping any further, let's start off in Matthew 12. We're going to start off in Matthew 12, and we're going to pick it up at verse 1. And we're going to look at one of these holy things. And today, hopefully, we can answer some questions that you might have had about a few things that you never quite really got a good understanding on. Maybe we can answer some of those things. And right here, Matthew 12, we're going to pick it up at verse 1. Matthew 12 and verse 1. When you get it, brother, go ahead and read.
At that time Jesus went on the Sabbath day through the corn, and his disciples were a-hungered, and began to pluck the ears of corn and to eat. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said unto him, Behold, thy disciples do that which is not lawful to do upon the Sabbath day.
Okay, so Jesus and the disciples, they're going along, and it cracks me up is, the Pharisees are watching. It's like they must have been following them. The Pharisees are following them all throughout wherever they are, watching to see if they're going to do anything that they can bring a charge against Jesus and these disciples. So this is on the Sabbath day, and Jesus and the disciples were hungry, and they begin to pluck ears of corn. Now you remember, see, Jesus and the disciples, they're going so hard in this thing that they didn't necessarily have time to stop here and there and eat. You know, sometimes they were so busy and so into this serving the Lord that they forgot to eat. Jesus had to remind the disciples a couple times, you know, slow down and take, you know, get some nourishment, get something to eat. So this is how hard they were into this word. And they're out here on the Sabbath day and they're hungry and they haven't eaten. And so they pluck these ears of corn, which it says, thy disciples do that. The Pharisees charged them, said, behold, thy disciples do that which is not lawful to do upon the Sabbath day. Right? Verse 3, go ahead.
But he said unto them, have you not read what David did when he was an hungered, and they were with him? How he entered into the house of God, and did eat the showbread, which is not lawful for him to eat, neither for them which were him, but only for the priests.
Okay, so Jesus, what he often did when confronted by these Pharisees is he opened up the scriptures to them. He put the scriptures on. And he says, have ye not read what David did when he was an hungered, and they that were with him? How he entered into the house of God and did eat the showbread. The showbread. And it says, which was not lawful for him to eat. So, this kind of begs a question. I don't know if you ever asked yourself this question. Exactly why was it not lawful for David to eat this showbread? What is special about the showbread that David, when he's hungry, and the people that are with him, that he can't eat the showbread? So why is it unlawful? Hopefully, as we keep reading, we'll answer that question. But he does say here, neither for them were with him, but only for the priest. So we find out a little something here, that the showbread was only meant for the priest. Okay, but why is that? Why is the showbread only for the priest? Keep reading, verse 5.
Or have you not read in the law how that on the Sabbath days the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? But I say unto you, that in this place is one greater than the temple. But if ye had known what is meaneth, I will have mercy and not sacrifice, ye would not have commended the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord, even of the Sabbath day.
Okay, so so Jesus let them know, look, you guys are concerned about these things. You're so concerned about these laws, because he's talking to the Pharisees, and the Pharisees were very hard, very strict on the law, to the point where they would rather David and his men, they would rather Jesus and the disciples starve to death on this day rather than get them something to eat, which doesn't make any sense. And that's why Jesus is letting them know, look, there is one here that is greater than the temple. He said, but if ye had known what this meaneth, I will have mercy and not sacrifice. You would not have condemned the guiltless. He's saying, if you had known what this means, you wouldn't even talk to me and say these things, because it doesn't make any sense for the servants of God to starve to death on the Sabbath day and not get something to eat when it's readily available. Because, did you finish 8? He said, for the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath day. And we're going to get some more understanding here in a second. Verse, where are we going to? That's verse 8? Okay, verse 8. So the Lord said, don't condemn us to death because it's a Sabbath day and we are hungry. So let's go to Mark 2. We're going to get a little bit more out of this. The same story, but it's going to give us a little bit more information. We get a little bit more understanding out of Mark 2, and we're going to pick it up at verse 23.
And it came to pass that he went through the cornfields on the Sabbath day, and his disciples began, as they went, to pluck ears of corn. And the Pharisees said unto them, behold, why do they do on the Sabbath day which is not lawful? And he said unto them, have you never read what David did when he had need and was a hungered, he and they that were with him?
Okay, so he said here, he says, have you never read what David did when he was what? When he had need. So obviously, David, he's letting you know that David didn't just go into this temple just because he's hungry, just to get something to eat. He's letting them know that David had need of this thing. It was an urgency that David and those that followed him got something to eat. So it was very important. Verse 26, come on.
How he went into the house of God in the days of Abiathar, the high priest, and did eat the showbread, which is not lawful to eat, but for the priests, and gave also to them which were with him.
So again, letting us know that David went into the house and he did eat of the showbread, which is only lawful for the priest to eat, and he also gave it to those that were with him. Verse 27.
And he said unto them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore the Son of Man is Lord also of the Sabbath.
Okay, so now we get just a little bit more information here and a little bit more understanding of what the Lord's talking about in Matthew 12. He's saying that the Sabbath was made for man, not the Sabbath, not man for the Sabbath. So again, it doesn't make any sense for man to die on the Sabbath because he's hungry for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for man. The Sabbath was made to help man to gain something better, to get further, to gain something in the future. Okay, so it is lawful. And we'll in the next set of verses here, we'll find out exactly just how much that entails. But it is lawful to get yourself something to eat instead of starving. It's lawful to help some and to do good on the Sabbath day. The Sabbath is not made. Man was not made for the Sabbath, but rather the Sabbath for man. So now let's go to Luke 6. Luke 6. And again, it's the same story, but we're going to get just a little bit more. Just a little bit more understanding. Luke 6. And we're going to pick it up at verse 6. Luke 6 and verse 6. All right, go ahead.
And it came to pass also on another Sabbath that he entered into the synagogue and taught. And there was a man whose right hand was withered. And the scribes and Pharisees watched him, whether he would heal on the Sabbath day, that they might find an accusation against him. But he knew their thoughts, and said to the man which had the withered hand, Rise up and stand forth in the midst. And he rose up and stood forth. Then Jesus said unto them, I will ask you one thing. Is it lawful on the Sabbath days to do good, or to do evil, to save life, or to destroy it?
Okay, so Jesus, and we actually jumped into it a little bit further than I wanted to, but that's all right. The first part of the story remains the same. David goes into the temple, and they eat the showbread, which was not lawful for them to do except for the priest alone. And so now we jump down a little bit, and it came to pass also on the Sabbath that he entered into the synagogue and taught, and there was a man whose right hand was withered, and Jesus, being able to perceive what was on the mind of the Pharisees, he asked them a question. First he said, but he knew their thoughts, and said to the man which had the withered hand, Rise up and stand forth in the midst. And he arose and stood forth. Verse 9.
Then said Jesus unto them, I will ask you one thing. Is it lawful on the Sabbath days to do good, or to do evil, to save life, or to destroy it? So
he asked him a legitimate question. Is it lawful on the Sabbath days to do good or to do evil? Is it to save life or destroy it? Which is more important on the Sabbath day? To do good or to do evil? To save life or to destroy it? Which is more important? Should we be worrying about whether or not David is actually eating the showbread and preserving his life? Or should we keep this thing in the temple that's made for only the priest, and keep it away from David and his followers, or Jesus and the disciples, and let them starve to death for this holy thing? No, we shouldn't do that. And this is the point the Lord is making here. Verse 10.
And looking around about upon them, he said unto the man, Stretch forth thy hand. And he did so, and his hand was restored whole as the other. And they were filled with madness, and communed one with another what they might do to Jesus.
Okay, he says, so he had the man stretch forth his hand, he healed the man's hand, and it says, and they were filled with madness. I bet they were. If Brother Rashad here was to, see, he's the closest thing we got to a physician in here, I think, right? I don't know anybody else is in the medical field. No. So he's the closest thing to a physician. If Brother Rashad says to somebody here that's got an issue, stick out their hand, and he heals it whole, I'm going to be the first one out the door. Because I can't take all that. I can't, that's too much. I can't deal with that. So I'm going to hit the door. And these people, these Jews here, they weren't ready for that either. That was something they were not particularly set to see that day, or they in their walk, in their spiritual walk, they weren't ready to see something like that. The Lord just healed this withered man's hand. This is probably somebody that they all knew that had this withered hand probably all his life. you know. And so now this man comes through here, you know, preaching the word of God, and heals this man's hand, just like that. And it says, and they were filled with madness. No, I bet they were. And communed one another what they might do to Jesus. Yes, they don't know if this man's got some kind of devil on him or what. He's doing these, he's talking crazy to us and telling us we can't do this and we can't do that, and because you know Jesus, every chance he got, he done tripped them up. You know, he put scriptures on them and had them fumbling with their fingers and drooling on themselves. Didn't know what to do with themselves. So this is why they're filled with madness. And what we need to pay attention here is, like I said in the beginning, the Lord don't just have us doing stuff for no reason. The Lord uses holy things. If we pay attention, the Lord uses holy things, such as this showbread, to show us a bigger picture, to show us a bigger message, to show us something on down in the future. So let's look at that. We finished that, right? Okay. So let's look at these. Let's look at some of these things. Because the Lord, what He can do. Well, actually, let's go look at the actual example that the Lord's talking about. 1 Samuel 21, 1 through 6, and let's see David committing this awful sin on the Sabbath day. Or not only, I'm not sure what day it was, but he's going into the synagogue and eating of the showbread. So let's look at that. 1 Samuel 21, and we're going to pick it up at verse 1. And again, keep in mind that we want to keep in our mind what is important. We want to understand what these holy things represent. And we want to try to understand how these things are a representation of things to come. So 1 Samuel 21, verses 1 and 1 through 6. Go ahead.
Then came David to Nob, to Amalek the priest. And Amalek, afraid of the meeting of David, and said unto him, Why art thou alone, and no man with thee? Okay, so where we are here is David is fleeing from Saul. Okay, so he has fled here, and he's come to Ahimelech, a high priest here, and he's brought these men with him. Verse 2. And David said to Ahimelech the priest, The king hath commanded me a business, and hath said unto me, Let no man know anything of the business whereabout I send thee, and what I have commanded thee. And I have appointed my servants to such and such a place. Okay, so David he kind of told a little bit of a fib here, because he's, like I said, he's running from Saul, and he doesn't want the Ahimelech to know the true nature, or to know actually that he's running, and to go run and tell Saul, because Saul has told everybody, wherever David's at, I want you to report to me and let me know where he's at, because he's trying to get him. So he's told Ahimelech a little bit of a lie here, which actually ends up getting Ahimelech killed, and everybody in this sanctuary killed later on. But verse 3, that's kind of getting off track, but just now of knowledge. Now thereof, what is under thine hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in my hand, or what there is present. Okay, so David is asking, he says, Now therefore, what is under thine hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in mine hand, and what there is present. So, like I said, David is fleeing. Him and his boys are hungry, and he's asking the priest, what do you have here to eat? Verse 4. And the priest answered David and said, There is no common bread under my hand, but there is hallowed bread, that the young men have kept themselves at least from women. Okay, so he says, the priest's answer says, there is no common bread under my hand. So I don't just have any just regular bread I can just give to you to eat. He said, but what I do have is hallowed bread. Hallowed bread meaning sanctified bread, meaning holy bread, meaning special bread. This bread is set apart from the common bread or any other bread that he has in this sanctuary, right? And then he says, if the young men have kept themselves at least from women. I bet David was like, what? He said, no, maybe you didn't hear me. I just want some bread. All I want is bread. Now the priest is giving him the 3rd degree. Have you guys been with women? Have you? No, I just want some bread. That's all I want.
But these little things like this are here for a reason. And if you're an astute student, if you're paying attention, you would know exactly what is going on here. So keep this in mind, and later on you'll get the answer to what is going on exactly here. Verse 5, go ahead.
And David answered the priest and said unto him, Of truth women have been kept from us about these 3 days since I came out. And the vessels of the young men are holy, and the bread is in a manner common. Yea, though it is sanctified this day in the vessel.
Okay, so David answered, and he went up and answered. He said, look, man, I just want some bread, but we these 3 days, we haven't been around the woman, we haven't been with the women, so as far as we know, we're clean concerning the women. Can we please have the bread? All right, so verse 6, come on.
So the priest gave him hallowed bread.
He gave him what kind of bread?
Hallowed bread.
The hallowed bread, holy bread. Go ahead.
For there was no bread there but the showbread that was taken from before the Lord, to put hot bread in the day when it was taken away.
Okay, so the priest ends up giving them the hallowed bread because they had no other bread. And it says that it was taken before the Lord to put a hot bread in the day when it was taken away. All right, so we understand, we see exactly what's going on with what Jesus was referring to when he referred back to this. David with his boys going into the temple, and we understand, hopefully we understand what was going on here. And we'll get some more understanding now that we opened up a few other things here. So, what is the showbread? What does it represent? How does it show us some things in the future? So let's go to Hebrews 8, so we can start opening up some understanding on what these things, how these things represent things to come, and why we should pay attention to them. We're going to pick it up. We're going to go Hebrews 8. We're going to pick it up at verse 13, and then go right into Hebrews 9. I put Hebrews 13 because we can't just start at verse 1 in chapter 9, because this is a continuation. Verse 1 is actually a continuation of the conversation that is started in chapter 8. So I didn't want to just start in the middle of it, which we kind of still are, but we kind of need verse 13 to go along with this. So Hebrews 8, 13, and we'll go right into chapter 9. Go ahead.
And that he saith, A new covenant he hath made, the first old. Now that which decayeth and waxeth old is ready to vanish away.
Okay, he said, and that he saith, a new covenant he hath made, the first old. So what's he talking about here? He's talking about the old covenant. He's talking about everything that we understand to be part of the Old Testament laws, the Old Testament ordinances, all those things, the animal sacrifice. These are old covenants. This is the old covenant. And he's saying here that a new covenant he hath made, with the new covenant, he hath made the old covenant, the first covenant old. The old covenant has become old. Okay? So now that that which decayeth, the old covenant, waxeth old, is ready to vanish away. He didn't say it's gone away. He said it's ready to vanish away. Because certain events have taken place with Jesus coming into the picture, coming down out of heaven into the flesh and being sacrificed for our sins, and then being resurrected. Those put certain events into place. One event in particular is, we know that when he was sacrificed, the veil of the temple rent, right? Okay, and when the veil of the temple rent, what did that put on hold? That suspended something, didn't it? That suspended the animal sacrifice. That suspended the Levite order, right? So these things that were of the old covenant now are being put on hold, because something new is happening. Something new is coming. Okay, so that's why he says, "Waxeth the old ready to vanish," and something new is coming in here. So going to chapter 9 and verse 1 now. Go ahead.
Then verily the first covenant had also ordinances of divine service and a worldly sanctuary.
Right. Then verily the first covenant had also ordinances of divine service. These things that we read about that Israel was doing in the old covenant, divine ordinances, they're there for a specific reason. It said they're divine service, of service to God, it said, is what he's talking about. and a worldly sanctuary. What's the worldly sanctuary? He's talking about the tabernacle. He's talking about the tabernacle that they built to go and do the animal sacrifices in, to go and do the burnt offerings and things like that. That's what he's talking about in the worldly sanctuary. Verse 2, go ahead.
For there was a tabernacle made, the first, wherein was the candlestick and the table and the showbread, which is called the sanctuary.
Which is called the sanctuary. So we're all clear, we understand what a tabernacle is, right? Everybody understand what the tabernacle is? The tabernacle he's talking about is that tent that they built that I think Font calls it a $5 million tent. Because it was built like that. It was with all that bling and all that gold in there. But that tent, with all that stuff in there, is the tabernacle that it's talking about. Okay? And he says, where's the candlestick, the table, the showbread, which is called the sanctuary. Which is called the sanctuary. The sanctuary being the place of the Lord, being a place of holiness. And I wanted to read the definition, I think, here of sanctuary. You know what I told you I was going to do?
That's it, yeah.
Okay. If my tablet will cooperate. Just a second, apologize, the tablet's not cooperating. Okay, there's four definitions of sanctuary there I'm having read. Go ahead.
Reverend, worthy of veneration, of things which on account of something connected with God possess a certain distinction and claim to reverence, as places sacred to God which are not to be profaned, of persons whose services God employs, for example, apostles, set apart for God to be, as it were, exclusively His, services and offerings, or prepared for God with solemn rite, pure and clean, in a moral sense, pure, sinless, upright, holy.
Okay. Is that it? So these are all things that sanctuary mean, and the most important thing to take from that is that it's a holy place, the holiest of all. It said the things which have account some connection with God, some things that account with some connection of God, possess a certain distinction and claim to reverence, importance. Things to be set aside or to be sanctified as places sacred to God which are not to be profaned. So these things that are in the temple are to be set apart, they're supposed to be considered holy, and they're not to be profaned. Okay? So this is what all these things in this temple represent and why they are set aside. Verse 3, go ahead.
And after the second veil, the tabernacle which is called the holiest of all, which is the golden censer and the Ark of the Covenant overlaid round about with gold, wherein was the golden pot that had manna, and Aaron's rod that budded, and the tables of the covenant. Okay, so these things are on the outside, on the other side of the veil. Not where the mercy seat is at, but on the other side of the veil. Verse 5, right? And over in the cherubims of glory, shadowing the mercy seat, of which we cannot now speak particularly. Because
we don't have the mercy seat anymore before us. We can't go before the mercy seat and ask the Lord's guidance, because for a lot of reasons, Israel, we don't have the Levites anymore, and we don't have the Ark of the Covenant. We don't have any of that, so we cannot speak to these things. The Lord doesn't talk to us like that anymore. Verse 6.
Now when these things were thus ordained, the priest went always into the first tabernacle, accomplishing the service of God. But into the second went the high priest alone once a year, not without blood, which he offered for himself for the errors of the people.
Okay, so now it says, verse 6, now when these things were thus ordained, the priest went always into the first tabernacle. So it's dividing, it's calling this tabernacle, it's kind of making it seem like there's two tabernacles, but what it's doing is it's dividing this one tabernacle into at least two compartments inside the tabernacle. The first part of the tabernacle, the sons of Aaron, or the Levites, they could go in and they could perform the duties of the Levites. They could perform the duties of that office. the second tabernacle, once a year, Aaron could only go in there by himself. That was on the other side of the veil. And if you remember from previous lessons, the only time he could go in there is when he took blood for the sacrifice. He had to purify himself. He had to purify Israel. He had to purify the holy thing. Then he took the blood in before the mercy seat, sprinkled the blood before the mercy seat. And only Aaron could go in there. Anybody else that went in there got cut off. The Lord would kill them instantly, because they had no business on that other side of the tent, or the other side of the veil. So this is the second veil that it's talking about there. Where you at? Verse 4?
Verse 8.
Verse 8, go ahead.
The Holy Ghost, this signifying that the way into the holiest of all was not yet made manifest, while as the first tabernacle was yet standing.
Okay, so what's he talking about here? The Holy Ghost, this signifying that the way into the holiest of all was not yet made manifest, while as the first tabernacle was standing. So, while this first tabernacle is standing, while this first tabernacle is in existence, the Lord couldn't do certain things while these things were in existence. Or maybe a better way to say it is the reason for these things being in the tabernacle in the first place doesn't come into fulfillment, or doesn't come into I don't like maybe filling its role until Jesus comes and does what he has to do, does his part to make those things to like fulfill them. Not all of the Old Testament. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying some of these things that are placed in the temple, and the showbread is one that we're looking at in particular. When Jesus comes, we see the significance of these things at his death. And this is why it's tied into the veil of the temple being rent, and some of these things being put on hold, being suspended for lack of a better word. Where are we at?
Verse 9.
Verse 9. Go ahead.
Which was a figure for the time then present, in which we offered both gifts and sacrifices that could not make him that did the service perfect, as pertaining to the conscience.
Okay, so which was a figure of the time that then was present, in which were offered both gifts and sacrifices that could not make him that did the service perfect, or pertaining to the conscience. Okay, so the things that we're talking about here is the things that the priest did, such as the animal sacrifices for whenever Israel did their sin, and they brought the bulls and the goats to the priest to do the sacrifices to make a sin offering. These things couldn't make the priest perfect. They couldn't make the sinner perfect. Okay, so these things are just they're just, like it says, a shadow of things to come. These things, the showbread, the candlesticks, the tabernacle, all these things are pointing to something down the road. They're pointing to something down in our future. What they are is, like he says later on, I can't remember if it's in this chapter or not, but these things are a schoolmaster. They're school teachers. They're a shadow of things to come. So the showbread, all these holy things they're meant to teach us something about the Lord. They're meant to teach us what is to come on in the future. But, like I said, because it's not exciting reading, we read right over the top of it and don't even consider, what does this showbread mean? What does the candlestick represent? What do these things mean? We read right over the top of that. And because we do that, we may be causing ourselves great harm. Or we may, in fact, lose our life when simple knowledge of these things could have saved our life. So we can't take what the Lord put in this book for granted, no matter how small it is. So, where are we at now?
Verse 10.
Verse 10, go ahead, Ray.
Which did only in meats and drinks, and diverse washings, and carnal ordinances, imposed on them unto the time of Reformation. But Christ being come on high priest of good things to come, by a greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, that is to say, not of this building. Okay, so all these things, what it's saying is, like I just said, all these things are put there, and all these actions that the priests are doing is to bring us to something better, to bring us to Christ, to show us that when Christ comes, if we have been paying attention to these things that we've been doing, if we've been paying attention to the showbread, when Christ comes, we can recognize him without fail.
We know exactly who was talking, who this man is. We know exactly what he has shown us because we've been doing it for the past 6,000 years. But because Israel is hard-headed, and because we, like in our lesson, my last lesson, I forget what the name of it was, but when you deal with instructions, because we're not good at following instructions to a T, we didn't know who Jesus was when he got here. And we fail to recognize him today because we don't know what these small things mean. And it's very important, brothers and sisters, that we don't overlook these things, especially when it comes to the signs that the Lord gave us. Because how are we going to know to flee when the abomination of desolation is standing in the temple if we've never read that? Before I came into this truth, I had no idea what that meant. But it took opening up this Bible every Sabbath day and some teachers with some understanding to show me what that meant. And now, when I see that sign come, I know what to do. If I don't do no more than jump up and down in my living room, I know to do something. So it's important to pay attention to these things that the Lord put before us, because it might save your life. Did we finish that, 11?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Exodus, we're going now to Exodus 25. So now we know that the showbread has some significance, and there's some importance to it. Let's see what some of the ordinances are concerning the showbread. Let's look at some of the tabernacle items that are alongside the showbread and where they're going to be placed. From going on, I'm going to try to show you where these items are, where they're located, the significance, how they represent or who they represent, the purpose of them, and hopefully you'll be able to understand exactly what the Lord is trying to show us here as we go on. So first, right now we're going to look at the ordinances concerning the showbread. So let's go to Exodus 25, and we're going to pick it up at verse 23. 25 and 23. When you get it, brother, go ahead and read.
Thou shalt make a table of shittim wood. 2 cubits shall be the length thereof, and a cubit the breadth thereof, and a cubit and a half the height thereof.
Okay, so we see the measurements given. What this is, that's 3. I bothered to look this up, by the way. 3 feet long, 1.5 feet wide, and 2 1/4 feet high. That's the dimensions of this table. And see, he starts this out. We start out with these dimensions. And right away, when you start, you're like, oh my goodness, so you just start this, and who begat this, and who begat that, and you start getting weary and tired. You might just look and see, where can I skip down to that makes some sense to me? We don't always want to do that, brothers and sisters, because the devil is in the details. There's some important facts in these little details that you need to know, or you should know. Verse 24.
Thou shalt overlay it with pure gold, and make thereto a crown of gold round about.
Okay, now he's not doing this in vain. He says, and there shall overlay it with pure gold, and make thereto a crown of gold round about. So he's doing this thing with pure gold. This time, this pure gold thing, this is, something of magnificence. How many of us have a pure gold table in our home? I don't. But neither am I going to. And he says and thereto put a crown of gold round about it. So he put a crown of gold around this thing. Keep going.
And thou shalt make unto it a border and a hand's breadth round about. And thou shalt make a golden crown to the border thereof round about. And thou shalt make for it 4 rings of gold, and put the rings in the 4 corners that are on the 4 feet thereof. Okay, so he says here, and thou shalt make for it 4 rings of gold, and put the rings in the 4 corners that are on the 4 feet thereof. So, of course, this isn't the dimension of the table, but if this table has 4 feet on it, right? And it says put the 4 rings on each corner or on each feet thereof. This is significant. This is very significant, because what these rings for are, as we keep going, I'll show you. Keep where you at, verse 27. Go ahead. Over against the borders shall the rings be for places of the staves to bear the table.
Okay, so those rings are for staves to bear the table. Keep going.
And thou shalt make the staves of shittim wood, and overlay them with gold, that the table may be borne with them.
Okay, so he says, and thou shalt make the staves of shittim wood, and overlay them with gold, that the table may be borne with them. So that the shittim wood, because what you do with the shittim wood are these staves, is you stuff those through the rings on the four corners of the table, and this is how, with the staff, this is how they would carry the table. Now I'm telling you, this is important. Also, that they made the staves out of this shittim wood and overlaid it with gold, so that it could bear the weight of everything that was on the table. And now, don't forget the table itself is made of gold, so that is going to be heavy. So they had to have something to carry it that was that could bear the weight. Okay. Now this is very important. If you're not looking for this, you just read right on past this and not even consider the significance of how this thing is to be carried. Verse 29. Come on.
And thou shalt make the dishes thereof, and spoons thereof, and covers thereof, and bowls thereof, to cover withal with pure gold, thou shalt make them. And thou shalt set upon the table showbread before me always.
Okay, so this is the table, and this is what he's had. He's had this table made of pure gold and a magnificent thing to behold. And he's put magnificent things on this table. And what did he say in verse 30? He said, and thou shalt set upon the table the showbread before me always. Right? Okay. Let's go now. Let's go now to John 6. Because he said, set the showbread before me always. So what we need to do is we need to understand, what does this showbread represent? Why is the bread important? Why is this bread important? What does this bread represent? This bread is ultra important because it represents a lot of things. The Lord even put this bread in the Lord's Prayer. It's even in the Lord's Prayer. We're going to John 6, and we're going to pick it up at verse 30. Is it hot in here to anybody else? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm burning up.
That's winter. Take the sweat off, you might feel a little cold.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know what I was thinking. John 6, and we're going to pick it up at verse 30, because we got to find out what this bread is. John 6 and 30, go ahead.
They said therefore unto him, what sign shewest thou then, that we may see and believe thee? What doest thou work?
Okay, so where we are here, we're picking it up. This is just after the Lord has fed, I think it was some 5,000 with, 7 loaves of bread and 2 fishes. This is just after that, okay? And now these people are asking him, they said, therefore unto him, what sign showest thou then, that we may see and believe? What dost thou work? Now, as I was saying before, if we have been paying attention, if Israel had been paying attention to what they were doing, what the Lord had them doing, they would understand these signs. The Lord wouldn't have to show them a sign. They would clearly understand what these signs meant. And in particular, we're focusing right now on the bread. They would clearly understand what the Lord was talking about when He had them doing what they did for the showbread, for the bread. He clearly understands this. But we'll have to keep reading, and He always has to keep explaining, because Israel don't pay no attention. So He's going to explain to them. Verse 32, right? No, 31, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Our fathers did eat manna in the desert, as it is written, He gave them bread out of heaven to eat. He gave them bread to eat.
He's talking about it, Moses, when He led them out of Egypt. The Lord rained manna down from heaven, and this was bread. But the Lord's going to clear this up for them. Keep going.
Then Jesus said unto them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, Moses gave you not that bread from heaven, but my Father giveth you the true bread from heaven.
Okay, so now see, he said, Moses gave you not that bread from heaven, but my Father gave you the true bread from heaven. He's talking about Himself being the true bread from heaven. Verse 33.
For the bread of God is He which cometh down from heaven, and giveth life unto the world.
Uh-huh.
Then said they unto him, Lord, evermore give us this bread. And Jesus said unto them, I am the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger, and he that believeth on me shall never thirst. But I said unto you, that ye also have seen me, and believe not.
And so, okay, so now what is he talking about? You have also seen me and believed not. Okay, so he just let him know, he says, I'm the bread of life. He said, the bread of God, he said, for the bread of God is he which cometh down from heaven and giveth life unto the world. So we can see what this showbread, how this showbread represents Jesus. This showbread is a representation of Jesus. Okay? He's the bread of life. He is what sustains us. He is what's supposed to sustain Israel. Okay? Now, as I said, if Israel had been paying attention to all that they were doing concerning the showbread, they would recognize Jesus and understand what he's talking about here. But he told them, he just told them, where did you finish that?
36.
36, he said, but I said unto you that he also has seen me and believed not. Believed not. They believed not because they didn't understand what they were doing. They had no idea what the showbread represented. So they didn't believe him. They had no idea sometimes what Moses was having them to do, and they didn't believe Moses. Jesus tells in other scriptures, if you had believed Moses, then you would believe me. So they did not understand the things that they were doing, and this is to their own harm. This is to their own hurt. And this is what happens to us, brothers and sisters. Because we don't understand everything that's going on, it's to our own shame. It's to our own hurt. Verse 37.
All that the Father giveth me shall come to me, and he that cometh to me I will no wise cast out. For I came down from heaven, not to do mine own will, but the will of him that sent me. And this is the Father's will which he hath sent me, that of all which he hath given me I should lose nothing, but should raise it up again at the last day. And this is the will of him that sent me, that everyone which seeth the Son and believeth on him may have everlasting life, and I will raise him up at the last day.
Okay, so in verse 6 says, and this is the will of him that sent me, that everyone which seeth the Son and believeth on him may have everlasting life, and I will raise him up at the last day. Okay, so he said, the Lord said a mouthful here. He says, and everyone that seeth the Son and believes on him. So when you are keeping the Sabbath, when you are eating clean, keeping yourself from sin, when you are performing the duties of a servant of God, you are believing in the Son. You are doing those things that he's talking about when he says, he that believeth on me. If you understand what the showbread represents, then you are understanding and you are seeing the Son. And this is how you get everlasting life. Because you believe on him and you know what he wants you to do and you're doing it. You're performing the duties with understanding. This is key, doing these things with understanding. And it says, and I will raise him up, when? At the last day. Kills that going, dying, and going to heaven thing. Once again, we like to always point that out. Verse 41.
The Jews did murmur at him, because he said, I am the bread which came down from heaven.
Okay, so here again, the Jews are murmuring at him because why? Because they lack understanding. Because they don't understand all that they've been doing. They didn't see the showbread. They couldn't see Jesus because they weren't paying attention. So they started murmuring again. And getting ready to stone him. Almost every time he talks to him, he got them ready to stone him. Because they don't have no understanding. Alright, so now let's go to Leviticus 24. Leviticus 24. So now that we have an understanding exactly what this bread represents, it is the bread of life. Let's look at how the Levites, how this comes into play concerning the Levites. Because he said in Exodus, 25 and 30, that this bread was to be before him always, right? Leviticus 24, and we're going to pick it up at verse 5. 24 and 5. Go ahead.
And thou shalt make fine flour, and bake 12 cakes thereof. 2 tenth deals shall be in 1 cake.
Okay. So here, let's see, verse 5, and thou shalt take fine flour, and bake 12 cakes thereof. 2 tenths deals shall be in 1 cake. He says, bake 12 cakes thereof. What do you think that represents? The 12 tribes of Israel. That's easy, right? That's easy. But if you're not paying attention and you don't wish to get understanding, this goes right over your head and you don't even understand what's going on here. But you need to understand, if you don't know about the 12 tribes, this is why it takes diligent study. This is why you have to study these scriptures to show yourself approved. So when he throws you little nuggets like this, it don't get past you. You know where he's at. So thou shalt take fine flour and bake 12 cakes thereof. 2 tenths deals shall be in 1 cake. Keep going.
And thou shalt set them in 2 rows, 6 on a row upon the pure table before the Lord.
Okay, so he set them in 2 rows, 6 on each side. Keep going.
And thou shalt put pure frankincense upon each row, that it may be on the bread for a memorial, even an offering made by fire unto the Lord.
Okay, so now he set this bread on the table and he's put pure frankincense. He said pure frankincense upon each row, that it may be on the bread for a memorial, even an offering made by fire unto the Lord. Even this frankincense means something, brothers and sisters. This is outside the scope of this lesson, so I'm not going to deal with that. But you should be aware that this frankincense also means something. It also means something. I should say it's outside the scope. It does fit within the scope, but I'm trying to focus on the showbread, so we're not going to cover the frankincense. Alright, keep going.
Verse 8.
Okay.
Every Sabbath he shall set it in order before the Lord continually.
Okay, every Sabbath he shall set this bread in order before the Lord continually. This is done every Sabbath, without fail. Keep going.
Being taken from the children of Israel by an everlasting covenant.
Because this too is a mouthful. This too represents something. Because the bread, we know the bread represents Jesus, right? And what he said, what did it just say? It said being taken from the children of Israel by an everlasting covenant. By the covenant, he's talking about because Jesus came down here and he was taken away from us by his sacrifice. So he's not taken away from us forever, but it's by covenant. So this, you see the similarities here. You see the prophecy that's put in play here. If you're not paying attention, you go right past this. Don't even see it. Keep verse 9. Go ahead.
And it shall be for Aaron and his sons, and they shall eat it in the holy place. For it is most holy unto him of the offering of the Lord, made by fire, by a perpetual statute. Okay, so he says now, and it shall be for Aaron and his sons. Aaron's of the tribe of Levite, and his sons are Levites. They are Levites. So, going back to why was the bread unlawful for David to eat? Because it was for the priests only. And who are the priests? The priests are Levites. David and his band of people, they weren't Levites. So by that definition, by those standards, it was unlawful for them to eat of the showbread. Because this showbread is supposed to be for Aaron and his sons, and they shall eat it in the holy place. They couldn't just eat it anywhere, but it's supposed to be eaten in the holy place, for it is what? It is most holy unto him. Most holy. He could have just said, for it is holy, but he put the word most holy in there. Because this bread, Jesus is most holy, is he not?
Yeah.
So this representation of Jesus has to meet the standards. It has to be most holy. It has to be a sacred and sanctified thing. And this thing is offerings of the Lord made by fire by a perpetual statute to be done forever. This is something. Why a perpetual statute? Because the Lord is supposed to be before Israel forever. In this example here, Aaron and the sons represent Israel. Because Aaron and the sons performed the duties of Israel, they were responsible for cleansing Israel. At the Day of Atonement, they were responsible taking the burden of the sins and doing the sin offering. So they represent Israel here. The bread it represents Christ, and this is supposed to be a perpetual statute before Israel forever. So what this is saying is that this bread, or Christ, is supposed to be before Israel forever. The Lord is supposed to be ever before us continually. Okay, so this is the importance that He's showing us here. Let's go now to 2 Chronicles. Because it says a perpetual covenant. 2 Chronicles 2. 2 Chronicles 2. And we're going to pick it up at verse 3. Is everybody with me? Am I making some decent sense? Okay, praise the Lord.
Verse 3.
Okay, 2 Chronicles 2 and verse 3. Go ahead.
And Solomon sent to Hiram, the king of Tyre, saying, As thou didst deal with David my father, and didst send him cedar to build him a house to dwell therein, even so deal with me.
Okay, so we're talking about King Solomon here. What Solomon does, he's preparing to build a temple. He's preparing to build this magnificent temple. Okay, because if you remember, David being in his palace, looked outside and saw the tabernacle of the Lord, this tent that's been run down, and it got on his heart and his mind to build the Lord a temple. But the Lord told David, your hands are too bloody, you can't build this temple for me. So he put this charge in Solomon's hand. And now Solomon is fulfilling this duty. He's building this temple. And so Solomon sent this letter to Hiram, the king of Tyre, and said, you have dealt with David my father, and in supplies concerning these cedars, talking about the wood. He said, since you dwelt with him, so deal with me. Because Solomon needs materials. So he's telling this king to deal with him like he dealt with his father. Verse 4.
Behold, I build an house to the name of the Lord my God, to dedicate it to him, and to burn before him sweet incense, and for the continual showbread.
And for the what?
Continual showbread.
For the continual showbread. This is one of the main things that Solomon mentions in this thing. So this helps you to understand just how important this showbread is. Just how important it really is. For a continual showbread, keep going.
And for the burnt offerings morning and evening, on the Sabbaths and on the new moons, and on the solemn feasts of the Lord our God. This is an ordinance forever to Israel.
This is an ordinance for what? Forever before Israel. And he hits all the major things, all the major important things that we still keep today and we hold dear and important. We still keep the feast, we keep the Sabbath day, we eat clean. He's hitting all these, he's hitting the major things that we know are supposed to be kept to us before us always. Now, obviously, we can't still do the showbread because we don't even know who the Levites are. We have no idea who the Levites are. And I'll show even further just how far removed we are from being able to do this as we keep reading. But the point here is that even Solomon knew that this was an ordinance forever. And when he built this brand new, magnificent temple, he's making considerations and plans for the showbread to be on display there continually. Exodus 25 and verse 30. Exodus 25 and verse 30. Again, we're just showing, I know we already read this, but I'm just showing that this is an ordinance forever. 25 and 30, go ahead.
And thou shalt set up upon the table showbread before me always.
Before me always. So this is something that represents the Lord that is supposed to be before Israel always. Exodus 26. Exodus 26. And we're going to verse 35. Because now we understand that this showbread, what it represents, that is supposed to be before the Lord always. Now, let's look at the location of the showbread. Where is the showbread supposed to be set? We know it's supposed to be on the table, but where is this table supposed to be set? Are we supposed to set it, out in the country somewhere, in the tabernacle, outside the tabernacle? Let's find out the location of the showbread, because these little details are important, brothers and sisters. You don't want to set that showbread in the wrong spot. Exodus 26 and verse 35. Go ahead.
And thou shalt set the table without the veil, and the candlestick over against the table on the side of the tabernacle towards the south. And thou shalt put the table on the north side. Okay, so he says, and thou shalt set the table without the veil. So this tabernacle is supposed to be on the other side of the veil that separates the first tabernacle from the second, which holds the mercy seat. So the table with the showbread doesn't go in the same side where the mercy seat is at. It's on the other side. Okay, we're clear on that. Okay, now let's go to Exodus 40.
Exodus 40. And we're going to pick it up at verse 22. 40 and 22. Go ahead.
And he put the table in the tent of the congregation upon the side of the tabernacle northward, without the veil. And he set the bread in order upon it before the Lord, as the Lord had commanded Moses. And he put the candlestick in the tent of the congregation over against the table on the side of the tabernacle southward.
Okay, so now we understand where he's putting the bread, but if you notice that wherever he puts the showbread, he also puts a candlestick it says in the tent of the congregation. Wherever you see that showbread, you will also see this candlestick. So we're not going to get into it now, but it would behoove you sometime on your own maybe to go ahead and read about the candlestick and how that relationship is. I'll go ahead and tell you that what is Jesus? He's the light of the world, right? So that candlestick represents the light. It also represents Jesus. It's also a representation of Jesus here. So you see the importance. Like I said, he don't just set things in there just to have us doing something and just to pretty up the table. These things mean something. They all mean something. Keep going.
And he lighted the lamps before the Lord, as the Lord commanded Moses. And he put the golden altar in the tent of the congregation.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's it. I just wanted 25. And he lighted the lamps before the Lord, as the Lord commanded. So he put the candlestick right beside the showbread and lit the light, and the lights ever before Israel, just like the showbread is. 2 Chronicles 4. Okay, 2 Chronicles 4. And we're going to pick it up at verse 19. Because, like I showed earlier in this chapter, that David knew about this showbread, the importance of it. And I'm just going to show you here that he did not neglect to put the showbread in the temple. He did not neglect to put this showbread in the temple. 2 Chronicles 4. And we're going to pick it up at verse 19. Go ahead.
And Solomon made all the vessels that were for the house of God, the golden altar also, and the tables whereon where the showbread was set. Moreover, the candlesticks with their lamps.
Okay, there's the candlesticks and the lamps again. But even more important, it says that he made all the vessels that were for the house of God, for the house of God. All these holy things that were considered holy, that were made holy by certain things. I think I did put in here that we're going to get into exactly how they're made holy. But all these holy vessels he put into this house of God in their right. Solomon and Moses were able to follow directions specifically and precisely, not like some of the rest of us, but they were able to follow these instructions precisely and put these things in their proper places. Where are you at?
20.
Verse 20. Go ahead.
Moreover, the candlesticks with their lamps, that they should burn after manner before the oracle, pure gold. And the flowers and the lamps and the tongs made he of gold, that perfect gold. And the snuffers and the basins and the spoons and the censers of pure gold. And the entry of the house, the inner doors thereof of the most holy place, and the doors of the house of the temple were of gold. Okay, so this is a magnificent structure with all this gold.
And I mean, it's hard to imagine. I mean, I can't imagine this how the glory of this temple that Solomon has built. Okay, so we understand now that all these holy things are placed in this temple. They're there for a specific reason, and they're there to show us something in the future. Now, as I mentioned, it's very important that instructions be followed. That the Lord's instructions be followed, not to please us, but to please the Lord. It's very important. So let's look at how do we take care of this showbread, because we don't want to make no mistake about it. Let's find out how this showbread is supposed to be handled. Numbers 4, and we're going to pick it up at verse 1. Let's find out how the showbread is supposed to be handled, who was supposed to be handling it, and let's deal with it that way so we don't make no mistakes. Numbers 4, verse 1. Come on.
And the Lord spake unto Moses and unto Aaron, saying, Take the son of the sons of Kohath from among the sons of Levi after their families, by the house of their fathers. From 30 years old and upward, even until 50 years old, all that enter into the host to do the work in the tabernacle of the congregation.
Okay, so now he's identified, the Lord has identified some people still inside the family Levites, but some others inside of the Levites. He's identified the family, the sons of Kohath here, right? He's identified them. They have to be 30 years old and upward, even until 50 years old. All that enter into the host to do the work in the tabernacle of the congregation. So these are the specific people who are chosen to do the service of God inside the tabernacle, right? Okay, verse 4.
This shall be the service of the sons of Kohath in the tabernacle of the congregation about the most holy things.
Okay, so this is what the sons of Kohath are going to do. Go ahead.
And when the camp setteth forward, Aaron shall come and his sons, and they shall take down the covering veil and cover the ark of the testimony with it.
Okay, so he says, and when the camp setteth forward. So when Israel, when it comes time, wherever Israel was at in the desert, when it comes time for them to move, it's up to Aaron. It says Aaron and his sons shall come in. So Aaron and his sons will come into the tabernacle, and they will get things prepared. They will take all the holy things, and the Lord's going to show you how they prepare these things. So this is what we're dealing with here. They're getting ready to move these holy things to the Ark of the Covenant, and it's up to Aaron and his sons to prepare these things. Now this is Aaron and his sons, the Levites. This is not the Kohath, the sons of Kohath that are doing this preparation. There's something to pay attention to. This is not the sons of Kohath that are doing this preparation. This is Aaron and his sons that are doing this preparing to move. Verse 6.
And shall put thereon the covering of badger skins, and shall spread it over a cloth wholly of blue, and shall put in the staves thereof. And upon the table of showbread they shall spread a cloth of blue, and put thereon the dishes, and the spoons, and the bowls, and the covers to cover withal. And the continual bread shall be thereon.
Okay, so they've got specific instructions to follow concerning the showbread, right? We see specific instructions how they're supposed to cover it and where it's supposed to be, what color, even down to the color of the cloth that's supposed to be put on this showbread. You keep going.
Verse 9. And they shall take a cloth of blue and cover the candlestick of the light and his lamps and his tongs and his snuff dishes and all the oil vessels thereof, wherewith they minister unto it.
So they got specific instructions of how to handle the other holy things. Because and you know this is how the Lord has to tell them how to do this, because it was, because Israel, we throw a blanket on the table, wrap all that stuff up, put it on our shoulder, and walk out. That ain't gonna work. That's not how he wants this stuff handled. This is the most holy stuff, it says. You got to have some respect. That's right. Keep going.
Verse 10. And they shall put it on all the vessels thereof within a covering of badger skin, and shall put it upon a bar. And upon the golden altar they shall spread a cloth of blue, and cover it with the covering of badger skins, and shall put it to the staves thereof. And they shall take all the instruments of ministry wherewith they minister in the sanctuary, and put them in a cloth of blue, and cover them with a covering of badger skins, and shall put them on a bar. And they shall take away the ashes from the altar, and spread a purple cloth thereon. And they shall put upon it all the vessels thereof, wherewith they minister about it, even the censers, the flesh hooks, and the shovels, and the basins, all the vessels of the altar. And they shall spread upon it a covering of badger skins, and put it to the staves of it. And when Aaron and his sons had made an end of covering the sanctuary, and all the vessels of the sanctuary, as the camp is to set forward.
Okay, so pay attention to this part. I'm sorry. He says, and when the Aaron and the sons had made an end of covering the sanctuary, so they made an end of preparing this stuff, and all the vessels of the sanctuary, as the camp is set forward to move, what then?
After that, the sons of Kohath shall come to bear it, but they shall not touch any holy thing, lest they die.
And he says they shall not touch any holy thing. Why? Lest they die. So this stuff has to be handled with proper care, and very specific instructions have to be followed, or they're going to die. is most important, that you read and understand instructions. Read the instructions to the end and make sure you got them all before you start just jumping in and writing your name on a piece of paper and then scribbling it out to avoid embarrassment. You have to bring it up. You got to be able to follow the Lord's instructions clearly. Okay? So the sons of Kohath, their job is after Aaron and the Levites, after his sons come in and get everything prepared, the sons of Kohath come in and they're the muscles. They are the ones that are dealt the job of carrying the stuff, transporting the stuff, right? Unless it says that they shall not touch any holy thing lest they die. Keep going.
15. These things are the burden of the sons of Kohath in the tabernacle of the congregation.
These things are the burden of the sons of Kohath. He didn't give this burden to nobody else. This burden is set with the sons of Kohath specifically and alone, right? Okay. Very, very important we understand this, because I don't want none of y'all get tripped up messing with the showbread when you ain't got no business messing with it. I want you to know what it means, but don't touch it. 2 Samuel 6. 2 Samuel 6. Because if you don't know what things mean, if you don't follow instructions, what you're getting ready to see right here just might happen to you. And we don't want, because of our lack of understanding, we don't want our souls to get cut off because we didn't know something we should have known. We didn't pay attention to something small that we should have paid attention to. 2 Samuel 6 verse 1. Come on.
Again, David gathered together all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. And David arose and went with all the people that were with him from Baal of Judah to bring up from thence the ark of God, whose name is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, that dwelt between the cherubims. And they set the ark of God upon a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab that was in Gibeah, and Uzzah and Ahio. The sons of Abinadab drave the new cart.
Okay, so we know what's happening here. David is moving the ark of the Lord to Jerusalem, okay? And what David has done here, he says, and they set the ark of God upon a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab that was in Gibeah, and Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, drave the new cart, this brand new cart. So before, they were supposed to use staves to move this ark, right? Well, that ain't good enough for David, I guess, so he's going to build them a brand new cart with some bling on it. And it might be easier to move this ark. So he puts this ark on this new cart. And he has chosen Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, to drive this new cart. Neither one of these, the second mistake, neither one of these is a Levite. Neither one of these is a son of Kohath. Mistake. Keep reading.
And they brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was at Gibeah, accompanying the ark of God, and Ahio went before the ark. And David and all the house of Israel played before the Lord on all manner of instruments made of fir wood, even on harps, and on psalteries, and in timbrels, and in cornets, and in cymbals. And when they came to Nashon's threshing floor, Uzzah put forth his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen shook it.
Okay, so the oxen, they probably hit a bump, the oxen shook the ark, or shook the cart, and the ark got ready to fall. And Uzzah put forth his hand and touched it. What happened?
And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God smote him there for his error, and there he died by the ark of God.
Killed him. Graveyard dead. Killed him.
Witness.
And he had, Uzzah, he had good intentions. He thought he was doing something for the Lord, and it's probably anybody's natural reaction. You see something fall, if you think you can stop it, you reach out to catch it. But the Lord gave specific instructions. Don't touch that thing lest you die. If the showbread falls out of the blanket, let it hit the ground. Unless you know you're a Levite or a Kohath, a son of Kohath. Just let it lie, because otherwise the anger of the Lord is going to be kindled against you and you're going to be struck dead. The Lord will have mercy on who He'll have mercy, but when He gives you specific instructions and you blatantly disobey that, Nothing good gonna happen. Did we finish that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. 2 Peter, last place. 2 Peter 1. They made a serious error in moving that ark. David didn't consider that he should probably consult with the Levites on how to move this thing properly, and it ended up getting someone killed. But you better believe they did it right from that point on. 2 Peter 1, and we're going to pick it up at verse 2. Go ahead.
Grace and peace be multiplied unto you through the knowledge of God and of our Jesus our Lord.
Wait a minute.
2 Peter.
That's 2.
Okay.
Oh, 1. Wait.
Yeah, that was 2.
Okay, I see, yeah. Awesome. Simon Peter, a servant and the apostle of Jesus Christ, to them that have obtained like precious faith with us throughout the righteousness of God and our Savior Jesus Christ. Grace and peace be multiplied unto you through the knowledge of God and of Jesus our Lord, according as his divine power hath given unto us all things that pertain unto life and godliness, throughout the knowledge of him that hath called us to glory and virtue.
Okay, so he says, grace and peace be multiplied unto you through what? Through knowledge of God and of Jesus our Lord. So it will behoove you, if you want grace and peace to be multiplied unto you, to gain knowledge of who? Of God and the Lord and our Lord Jesus Christ, right? According as his divine power hath given unto us all things that pertain unto life and godliness, through the knowledge of him that hath called us to glory and virtue. See, he's given us these things to give us knowledge. He's given us everything that we need that pertains unto life and to what he said? He said godliness. Through the knowledge of him that hath called us to glory and virtue. Verse 4.
Whereby are given unto us exceedingly great and precious promises, that by these ye might be partakers of the divine nature, having escaped the corruption that is in the world through lust.
That's right. So by this knowledge, we're able to escape the corruption and the death of this world, if we only pay attention. And it's only through knowledge that we gain these things. And one way you're going to get knowledge is if you get in this book and you study and you pay attention, and not only pay attention but comprehend and understand what it is that you're reading. Understanding is important. Verse 5.
And besides this, giving all diligence, add to your faith virtue, and to virtue knowledge.
He said, and besides all this, giving all diligence, doing all the utmost that you can, to add to your what? To your faith, virtue, and to virtue, knowledge. It is most important for us to add knowledge to everything else that we have. It's most important. We need the understanding. Verse 6.
And to knowledge temperance, and to temperance patience,